Imagine a map. Southeast Asia. The kind that looks like a wrinkled green blanket thrown over a table, cut by rivers and coastlines and mountains. If you zoom in, you find two countries pressed tightly against each other: Vietnam, long, thin, a coastline stretching like a spine, and Cambodia, sitting just west of it, with the Mekong River running like a lifeline straight through it. And between these two countries, between these two lines on the map, lies a story that most people outside the region barely know. A story about invasions, proxy wars, genocide, and how, for more than a decade, Cambodia was, in effect, two different countries depending on where you stood. A government in the cities rebuilding from the ashes, and a resistance on the borders claiming to speak for the nation while fighting from the jungles. Both sides claiming legitimacy. Both claiming to be the real Cambodia. And at the center of it is Vietnam, a country that didn't just invade Cambodia, it nearly reshaped the country's entire political geography. But to understand how Cambodia almost got split in two, you have to zoom out. Way out. Because this story doesn't start in 1979, when Vietnamese tanks rolled into Phnom Penh. It starts long before that, with old rivalries, old borders, old empires. It starts in a time when these lines on the map didn't exist, when the Khmer Empire controlled a massive portion of mainland Southeast Asia and built temples like Angkor Wat, places that made Europe's cathedrals look like playground decorations. Back then, Vietnam wasn't Vietnam yet. It was a small kingdom squeezed between China to the north and powerful neighbors to the west. Over centuries, Vietnam slowly expanded southward. Cambodia slowly shrank. And the border between them became something like a bruise, sensitive, tender, and always carrying the memory of past confrontations. Fast forward to the 20th century. Colonialism. World Wars. The Cold War. Vietnam goes through a devastating conflict with the United States and comes out battered but unified under a communist government. Cambodia, on the other hand, is spiraling into chaos. In 1975, a group called the Khmer Rouge, radical, ruthless, and deeply paranoid, takes power. And this is where the story gets dark. Really dark. In just under 4 years, the Khmer Rouge turns Cambodia into a nightmare. They shut down cities. They abolish money. They tear families apart. They turn schools into torture centers. They starve, overwork, and execute anyone they suspect of disloyalty: educated people, monks, doctors, farmers, sometimes entire villages. Nearly 2 million people die. Cambodia becomes a graveyard with borders. But while the Khmer Rouge is destroying the country from the inside, it's also provoking Vietnam from the outside. Border villages get attacked. Civilians get massacred. Khmer Rouge leaders accuse Vietnam of historical theft and racial betrayal. They send troops into Vietnamese territory. They literally mark them enemy number one. And Vietnam, already exhausted from decades of war, reaches a breaking point. So on December 25, 1978, Christmas Day, Vietnam invades. Now, this isn't a small border skirmish. This is a full-scale, coordinated, lightning-speed military operation. Vietnamese troops cross into Cambodia from multiple directions. They advance on major towns. And within just 2 weeks, they reach Phnom Penh. The Khmer Rouge government collapses. Pol Pot flees into the jungle. And this moment, this fast, decisive removal of the Khmer Rouge, is where the story often stops for people who only know the headlines. Vietnam invaded, removed a brutal regime, and stayed for a while. End of story. But that's not the story. Because what Vietnam did next didn't just shape Cambodia's future, it nearly split it. Vietnam sets up a new Cambodian government. They call it the People's Republic of Kampuchea. It's run by former Khmer Rouge members who had defected earlier. It's communist. It's friendly to Vietnam. And it's technically in control of the capital and the country's administrative heart. But outside the cities, outside the reach of the new government, something else is happening. The Khmer Rouge isn't dead. Its fighters retreat to the jungles along the Thai border. And they're not alone. Monarchists and non-communist resistance groups, enemies of the Khmer Rouge just months earlier, now find themselves united against a common enemy, Vietnam. It's one of the strangest alliances in modern history. Think about it, the very people who carried out genocide are now part of a coalition claiming to represent Cambodia internationally. Not because anyone suddenly likes the Khmer Rouge, but because geopolitics doesn't care about morality. It cares about leverage. This is the Cold War. And in the Cold War, enemies of your enemy become friends, or at least useful tools. China, furious at Vietnam and Soviet influence, begins supporting the Khmer Rouge. Western countries, wanting to contain Vietnam, indirectly allow support to flow to the anti-Vietnamese coalition. Thailand provides border access. Refugee camps become recruitment hubs. International funding flows into resistance groups. And the coalition gets something extremely valuable, Cambodia's official seat at the United Nations. So now you have two Cambodias. One in Phnom Penh, rebuilding, run by pro-Vietnamese officials, recognized mostly by communist countries. And another on the borderlands, in jungles, mountains, refugee camps, made up of royalists, nationalists, and yes, the Khmer Rouge, recognized by much of the international community. Two governments. Two armies. Two visions for what Cambodia should be. And this is the moment where Cambodia starts to look like it's splitting in two. If you imagine the map now, Cambodia looks like a patchwork. The cities are firmly under the Phnom Penh government. Roads are guarded by Vietnamese troops. Government offices are reopened. Schools and markets slowly come back to life. Life is fragile but structured. But the border regions? Totally different story. Guerrilla forces operate in thick forests. Fighters slip across the Thai border for supplies and training. Foreign journalists visit rebel camps. Diplomats shake hands with coalition leaders. And the world at large, the UN, major Western nations, is still, officially, recognizing this borderland coalition as the real Cambodia. Think about how insane that is. The government rebuilding the country and feeding its population isn't recognized. The coalition containing the group that committed genocide is. It's one of the most upside-down geopolitical moments you'll ever see. And because of this split in recognition, the country becomes ungovernable. Cambodia basically can't function as a unified state. International aid goes to refugee camps and resistance movements, not to Phnom Penh. Embassies stay closed. Trade is non-existent. Infrastructure projects stall. The new government struggles to feed its population. And meanwhile, the resistance uses the chaos to expand. Some villages pledge loyalty to the Phnom Penh government for safety. Others pledge to the coalition to avoid being targeted. Others switch sides depending on who shows up with guns that week. Cambodia becomes a country where alliances change not by ideology, but by survival. There are moments where Vietnam seems to have firm control. Then suddenly the resistance counterattacks. There are years where the Khmer Rouge is weak. Then China increases support, and they rebound. There are times where Thai border camps swell to tens of thousands of people, civilians living side by side with rebel soldiers, all dependent on international organizations that are themselves entangled in the politics of the conflict. For the average Cambodian living through this, it doesn't feel like ideology. It feels like constant instability. It feels like living in a country cut by invisible lines, lines that shift, expand, contract. Lines that say, here is one Cambodia, here is another. Now, zoom out again. Because Vietnam didn't just create a military occupation, it created a legitimacy vacuum. Vietnam had tanks, soldiers, government buildings, and ministries. The coalition had recognition, funding, world sympathy, and a diplomatic megaphone. Neither side had everything. And so neither side could win. And meanwhile, the Cold War powers kept the conflict alive because it served their interests. Vietnam was aligned with the Soviet Union. The coalition was backed, indirectly or directly, by China, the US, ASEAN nations, and Europe. Cambodia became less of a country and more of a chessboard. This goes on for an entire decade. From 1979 to 1989, Vietnamese soldiers are stationed in Cambodia. They build roads, repair bridges, fight guerrillas, and try to maintain order. But every year, the cost increases, economically, politically, domestically. Vietnam is isolated internationally. Its economy suffers. Cambodia drains resources it doesn't have. And by the late 1980s, the world begins to change. The Soviet Union is collapsing. China is shifting its strategy. The US is recalibrating its global posture. The Cold War is losing steam. Safe havens for rebels start closing. Funding gets tighter. The geopolitics that kept this conflict alive begins losing its oxygen.